About 2 months before my high school graduation, I took a bus trip to Washington, D.C. This wasn't the senior year field trip, as you might imagine, and along the way, we didn't really stop to take in the sights. The bus wasn't the most comfortable, nor the most pleasant smelling, but I do remember that this trip had a much larger impact on my life than I could have understood at the time. And you see, this bus was filled with some of my closest friends, mentors, and colleagues, and we were all heading to Washington, D.C. to march on Capitol Hill and make our voices heard as allies and undocumented people. And on that 12-hour bus ride, we shared stories, raw stories, of pain, of joy, and of hope. We brought one another to tears as we found commonalities in our lived experiences and reassurance as to why we were on that journey together. And I will admit that at the time, I didn't see myself as an activist. Certainly, I wouldn't have called myself that. I felt like this was one of those history in the making moments, and not only did I not want to miss it, I wanted to be on the right side of it. And so, as memorable as this trip really was for me, it didn't actually come full circle until this past spring as I was researching and writing my senior capstone on the topic of student activism as leadership development. And so I am here today to ask you to consider activism, why activism is an effective vehicle for developing the next generation of leaders, and why it's as powerful a tool as other more commonly and accepted forms of student development. And so activism is the collective direct action of groups of people, be it quiet or noisy, to create change. It is a strategy. And it is a strategy that has been a driver of social change in our society, and one that is synonymous with the American higher education system. Since the 1930s, activism has been part of the college campus experience, even though the 1960s forward is what we typically tend to highlight. Since 2014, we have seen a resurgence of student activism across the nation on issues of gender and racial equity, sexual assault reform, the environment, and immigrant rights, just to name a few. And so activism, while it greatly differs from these big movements of the past, such as the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and the women's liberation movement, the medium has changed. Student activists are existing in a post-social media world where they can easily share and reshare and be part of several movements as they go throughout their day. Technology has made it possible for the student activists of today to break down institutional hierarchy, to be in direct communication with those they seek to recruit and those they seek to institute change. And so, while technology has made it possible, the mediums have changed, activism looks a lot different, students are unfortunately still treated much the same, with some general opposition, criticism, and often with violence or discipline. And so, while we want our students to be engaged and involved, activism is one of those ways in which students do so, where they participate wholeheartedly, where they bring themselves to an issue, their whole values and beliefs, and execute that belief by standing up for that. And so, through this research that I did over the past year, what really crystallized is that participating in activism is a key way for students to develop into principled, authentic leaders over their lifetimes at a much higher rate than those that do not share this experience, and even those that participate in more commonly accepted forms of leadership positions, such as student governance or having another leadership role on campus. And so we can no longer ignore this growing body of evidence that shows that activism is an effective tool, and not just for social change, but for student development across their lifetime. And so this paradigm shift and embracing activism with the same level of commitment as we do other forms of leadership development will certainly take some intentional efforts from all across campus. And to do that, we need to position ourselves to move forward from the position of adversaries to partners. And this means being present for our students, online and offline, through whichever medium they choose to express their needs and concerns, whether that's through a post, a pitch, or a protest. And really, the view that we are adversaries and not partners is really what prevents the opportunity for us to encourage students to share their voices, grow their skill sets, through activism as a way of not only impacting their campus, but their wider community as well. And so secondly, to move about this paradigm shift, we need to recognize that it is our role as higher education professionals, leaders, professors, for us to guide our students from the beginning of students seeing an injustice to choosing to do something about it without overshadowing their efforts, and really helping them to reflect when they know enough to take responsible action versus when they don't know enough quite yet to do so. And so, as I reflect on this trip that as I reflect on this trip that I took to Washington, D.C., now nearly 10 years ago, I realized that most importantly, this opportunity crystallized for me that I had the power to make a difference, and I had the power to empower those around me to do the same. Me, a first-generation immigrant, a member of a marginalized group, one that has more often than not made to feel powerless because of circumstances. And so I leave you to consider why it is that activism is this rich source of raw potential where students can develop identity congruence, confidence, leadership, all across their lifetime. Because quite honestly, if they're not able to practice this while they're on our campus, then we are leaving them ill-equipped for their civic lives post-graduation. And it becomes a question of if not us, then who? Thank you.